I died in front of the male lead due to a car accident. The system notified him, your first love has logged off. The driver of the car knelt on the ground, pleading for his forgiveness. The system notified him, your heroine has logged on. Chapter 01. I had been with Albert for 10 years, always believing I was living out the heroine's script. In high school, Albert was a rebellious student who got into a fight and broke my thick black glasses. Later, he changed seats and became my desk mate, helping me copy the teacher's notes in every class. Then he won the 3,000-meter race at the sports meet, dragging me up to the podium with him. The crowd cheered, and the principal handed Albert the award with a frown. He raised an eyebrow at me and the principal, on my account. Shake hands. After we went to college, we got together. On weekends, he would take a 3-hour train ride to see me, and we'd just hang out at a little bar by the school. I would read him funny quotes I found online during an 800-meter fitness test. My desk mate insisted on racing me. Who knew the school bully would scoop me up and sprint 2 laps ahead? At the finish line, the bully kissed me. The whole class is buzzing. Albert was amused but exasperated. What nonsense. The next moment, he suddenly kissed me. That was our first kiss. We both went a little crazy. After graduation, we moved into a rented apartment, making sure to supervise each other to sleep before midnight, only to get up at 2 a.m. to order takeout. Later, we settled into stable jobs, bought a home with a mortgage, and our parents were very satisfied. Finally, we reached our 10th anniversary. That day, I was working late into the night. Just as I stepped out of the office, a fierce-looking man charged at me with a bloody kitchen knife. Just like that, my life was abruptly ended by a sociopathic freak. At that moment, Albert was home playing video games. He glanced at the time, realized I was coming home, and hurriedly turned off the game, going to the kitchen to prepare a late-night snack. He called me, but I didn't pick up. When the water boiled, he didn't think much of it. After I passed away, my soul floated beside him. I heard a deep, emotionless voice in my ear, like a robotic assistant. The voice said to Albert, your first love has logged off. Chapter 02. I thought my exit was outrageous, but it turned out there was something even more outrageous. After my death, my transparent soul floated beside Albert for 3 days, but since his heroine hadn't appeared during that time, I came back to life. I mean, according to the system's setup, my death must trigger the appearance of Albert's heroine. If she doesn't show up, I will return to the month before my accident and die again in another way. And so on, in an infinite loop. The system had prepared countless ways for me to log off. Choking while eating, getting frustrated at work, dying in an earthquake while sleeping at home, encountering a tsunami while traveling, finding out I had stomach cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, or a brain tumor during a health checkup, or even standing on the street at midnight looking at the moon and running into a mugger. I became numb to it all. So far, I had logged off 98 times. This was my 99th cycle. On this day, knowing I was destined to log off again, I calmly took 2 months' worth of Albert's salary to buy a bag. As I reached the intersection, a black car sped towards me. I instinctively wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Then my body was thrown into the air, landing heavily on the ground. When I opened my eyes again, my feet were off the ground, my transparent soul floating in the air. As bystanders gasped in shock, I looked down at my own crumpled body with indifference. At that moment, the car door swung open, and the panicked driver rushed out. Chapter 03. I died. And this time, Albert didn't shed a single tear. I didn't know when it started, but Albert no longer mourned for me while friends and family wiped their tears at my funeral. He held my photo with an air of indifference. I realized that the more cycles I went through, the clearer it became that his feelings for me were minimal. Though we had been together for 10 years, I was merely a tragic ex-girlfriend in his life. His true love was likely the heroine who hadn't yet appeared. At the funeral, my friends couldn't help but scold him. How can you be so cold-hearted? Laura deserved so much better. She could have chosen someone else. Albert replied nonchalantly. Then let her choose someone else. That would be best. My friends muttered about checking if Albert had taken out insurance on me. Seeing Albert's nonchalant demeanor, I finally decided, in 3 days. When I woke up again, the first thing I would do was break up with him. After the funeral, Albert returned home, sat on the couch in a daze for a while, and then got up to make instant noodles. He turned on the tap, but no water came out. He called out to the living room, "Laura, the water's off again." I froze. And he froze. Then that fool lay on the bed, chewing on a pack of instant noodles. He flipped through the photos of me on his phone. The atmosphere turned sad, reminiscent of a male lead reminiscing about his first love. But the next second, we both noticed that all 3,000 photos on his phone were unflattering pictures of me. The mood shattered completely. Chapter 04. The family of the driver returned from abroad. The unfortunate culprit was an underage boy driving without a license, and the car owner was his older sister. As I floated behind Albert into the mediation room, the boy's parents were crying and begging for my parents' forgiveness. A figure in white suddenly knelt down in front of Albert. I looked down to see a beautiful woman, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. It was my brother's fault. I'm so sorry. He's still so young." Albert remained unmoved. The beautiful woman wiped her tears, her nose red, of course. "My brother did wrong and should take responsibility. We didn't educate him properly. I'm sorry, but he really didn't mean to do it." Albert frowned and retorted, "If your brother didn't mean it, did my girlfriend intend to die?" The woman regained her composure, stood up, and handed her business card to Albert. "If you'd like to discuss compensation, please feel free to contact me. My name is Daniela." I sized her up. Albert stared at her, hesitating to take the card. The tension hung in the air, until I suddenly heard a familiar voice. The system coldly and mechanically notifying Albert, "Your heroine has logged on." Damn it! How cheap is this plot? Albert took her card, then ripped it in half the next second. Daniela took a deep breath, her expression unchanged. "I will contact you proactively." Unfazed by her, Albert replied coldly, "See you in court." Daniela helped her parents up and brushed past Albert. I looked at her, then back at him, feeling as if the world was spinning. It was now noon on the 3rd day after my death. Originally, there were still 12 hours before I could start my 100th cycle and return to the month before my accident. But now I realized I could never go back. Albert's heroine had appeared, and his life would move forward. But what about my life? My life was one where I had truly lived for over 20 years, only to become a mere supporting character in someone else's story, ultimately reduced to the label of a tragic first love, lingering in the male lead's memories as a phantom. Chapter 05. I didn't wake up again. I continued to float beside Albert, as the system required me to witness how he and the heroine gradually fell in love. At this point, they were still in a hostile state. The system said it would set up a hero saving the damsel scenario to bring them closer together. For over 10 days, Albert stayed cooped up at home, sleeping from dawn until dusk, lost in a deep slumber. Finally, his friends couldn't stand it any longer and dragged him out for drinks. They urged him to let go and move past the shadow of grief. Albert kept his head down, and I could see he hadn't even stepped into that shadow. In the middle of the night, I walked alongside Albert on a quiet street. Suddenly, hurried footsteps approached from behind. Before I could turn around, someone rushed past me and grabbed Albert. "Please help me." That familiar voice. "There's someone following me. Please help." "Mr. Bai." Upon realizing it was Albert Bai, Daniela awkwardly released her grip. I turned to look and, sure enough, there was a man lurking in the distance. Albert glanced at Daniela and suddenly sneered. "He's definitely not following you on purpose." Albert moved forward, and Daniela cautiously kept pace beside him. The man following hesitated, unsure whether to approach. When they reached near the police station, Daniela let out a sigh of relief and thanked Albert. Albert asked her, "Are you scared?" She seemed puzzled. "Not anymore." Albert held a cigarette between his fingers and pointed to the intersection ahead. "So tell me, when my girlfriend was standing there, watching your brother crash into her, was she scared?" Daniela looked in the direction he was pointing and trembled. "Where is this?" "This is where your brother killed someone. Look at the ground. There's my girlfriend's blood." Daniela seemed to have walked out of a wolf's den only to fall into a tiger's lair. Albert's fierce gaze made her fingers tremble. I watched their standoff with sadness. It was hard to imagine that the Albert who despised Daniela so much now would one day hold her and call her baby and dear. Chapter 06. Daniela's brother. Being a minor and with a mental health certificate resulted in a less than satisfactory verdict. In court, Albert lost control of his emotions. Nearly rushing to confront someone, he was pulled into the hallway by a group of people. Frustrated, he punched the wall, blood streaming from his hand. My relatives and friends hated that he hadn't shed a tear at my funeral, believing he was now putting on a show of deep emotion. Surprisingly, it was Daniela who returned with alcohol and bandages for him. She squatted beside him, tending to his wounds. Her first words were, "I'm sorry." Her second was, "Your girlfriend wouldn't want to see you like this." "No," I thought. "Let him feel some pain. It's for the best." Her third line was, "Mr. Bai, you need to pull yourself together." But before she could finish her comforting words, Albert suddenly raised his injured hand and slammed it against the armrest of the chair. The freshly bandaged wound bled through the gauze again. He glared at Daniela with bloodshot eyes, gritting his teeth as he said, "Don't act so fake." Daniela, unfazed, dropped the alcohol and gauze, stood up, and walked away. I heard the system sigh in my ear. Sigh. The male and female lead seemed to have a long road ahead. That night, Albert returned home, and it was the first time I saw him cry since my death. His tears flowed like water finally released from a faucet that had been turned off for too long, filling the large living room with a loud sound. Unfortunately, my parents had already taken all my belongings, and he didn't know where to direct his grief, because, until now, Albert still hadn't placed my photo anywhere. He went into the room, rummaging through things until he found a ring I had left behind, then slipped it onto his ring finger. Chapter 07. Albert finally returned to a normal life. He had a renovation project at a resort, and among the list of selected design companies, he saw that the chief designer was Daniela. 2 days later, Albert packed his bags for the resort island, and Daniela's team followed. I loved that island. Albert had once prepared a surprise for our anniversary there, and we had even planned to hold our wedding ceremony on that island. He was being deliberate. He wanted to use everything related to me to take revenge on Daniela. Little did he know that their story, which started because of me, would develop in my favorite place. Perhaps the audience wishing them well would thank me for the fateful encounter, but no one would care whether I, the tragic first love, was willing. Daniela put on a smile to meet the client, only to find it was Albert, causing her smile to freeze instantly. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm suitable for this project." She grabbed her luggage and tried to leave. "Is that a breach of contract?" Albert's expression was unpredictable as he flashed a cunning smile. "Miss Lee, I think even if your family wealth multiplied tenfold, it wouldn't cover the breach of contract fee." Daniela's family valued sons over daughters. After her brother's incident, the compensation awarded by the court fell heavily on her shoulders. She had no money to pay for the breach of contract. The poor heroine had no choice but to accept this hot potato. Chapter 08. Daniela, of course, was unwilling to cooperate, but Albert had countless ways to torment her. As the head of the client, Albert organized a dinner, and when Daniela arrived late, she was pressured to drink 3 shots as a punishment. The atmosphere at the table was just right when Albert suddenly chuckled. "Miss Lee, if you want to drink, just do it. What's there to fear? Even if you hit someone while driving, don't worry." I floated beside Albert and saw how awful Daniela looked. The colleagues around her froze in shock. Albert lowered his head, fiddling with the ring on his ring finger. He continued nonchalantly, "Just one family producing one murderer is enough, right?" The crowd became awkward, fidgeting uncomfortably. Daniela's face turned pale as she forced a smile, standing up to leave the restaurant, leaving the silent group behind. I heard her breath tremble. On the first day of work, Daniela had her family's shame exposed by Albert in front of all her colleagues, becoming the subject of gossip for others. She didn't fight back or confront Albert. She merely endured his revenge. Albert also had no appetite after Daniela left and walked out of the restaurant. That night, he lay in bed, rubbing the ring, habitually leaving the space to his right empty for me. I didn't know if he missed me or if he was sad. I only knew that tonight. He kept his eyes fixed on Daniela, unwavering, not shifting his gaze. His mind was filled with thoughts of how to take revenge on Daniela. Chapter 09. Albert insisted that Daniela accompany him for a round-the-island inspection. He gripped the steering wheel, flooring the gas pedal, speeding down the open coastal road, while Daniela sat in the passenger seat, her face pale with fear. She bit her trembling lip and said, "Mr. Bai, can we stop for a moment?" Albert ignored her, his gaze icy. The more frantic she became, the more he reveled in it. He almost perversely enjoyed this moment. After a long while, the car finally came to a halt. Daniela's legs buckled as she opened the car door and collapsed to her knees, vomiting at his feet. He looked down at her, watching her struggle at his feet. He pulled her up and pushed her into the driver's seat. "Here, I'll give you a chance to take revenge on me." Daniela clenched her fists tightly. "I'm sorry. Mr. Bai, I can't drive." "Can't?" Albert sat calmly in the passenger seat, as if he'd heard the biggest joke in the world. "What do you mean you can't? Just drive and crash into a tree. Your family's mental health history is your license." Daniela gritted her teeth and, under Albert's pressure, started the car. Albert bombarded her with the most hurtful, caustic remarks, belittling her. I listened, a bit dazed. In my memories, Albert had always been a pure, carefree boy. He would smile at me, even taking a break from fighting others to give me a thumbs up. Now, he wore a gloomy expression, wishing he could stomp Daniela into hell. I could see Daniela sweating profusely, her complexion as pale as paper. Yet she remained silent. After a long while, Albert grew tired himself. Leaning back in his seat, he said quietly, "Just hit any tree by the roadside, and we'll both be free." Daniela paused, then suddenly forced a stiff smile. "Mr. Bai, you are the client. I will definitely ensure your safe return to the resort. Besides, you haven't accepted our family's apology yet, have you?" Her tone revealed her counterattack against Albert. I sat in the back seat, glancing between her and him. "Aw, it's okay. He'll not only accept your apology in the future, but he'll also apologize to you for the torment he put you through today." Upon arriving at the resort, Daniela immediately leaned against the car door, sliding down to the ground. Her colleagues rushed over to help her. "Didn't the doctor say you shouldn't drive? What's wrong with you?" "Mr. Bai, I'm sorry, but Daniela has been struggling with psychological issues, and her therapist advised her against driving. If you have any work, please reach out to our other colleagues." It seemed that Daniela's shaking wasn't just from fear of Albert. Albert remained silent, fixated on her. Was he touched by the heroine's vulnerability? But he smiled mockingly. "Your family's excuses are really quite varied." Chapter 10. I didn't understand what Albert's revenge on Daniela was aimed at. Was he seeking her life? But we all knew, objectively speaking, she was innocent. That night, while Daniela's colleagues barbecued on the beach, Albert demanded she submit 2 proposals by morning, leaving her alone on a swinging bridge by the sea to plan. Albert approached her and glanced at her draft proposal, giving it just a cursory look. "Redo it." Then he tossed it to the ground. After a night of sea breeze, Daniela was unwilling to accept this. Finally, she mustered the courage to speak up. "Mr. Bai, you assigned me to this project. When will you stop taking out your personal grudges on me?" "When my girlfriend comes back to life." Daniela grasped him. "That's enough." Albert forcefully shook her off. Unexpectedly, he was too forceful. Daniela lost her balance and toppled over the railing of the swinging bridge. In a flash, she grabbed Albert, holding on tightly. In the darkness, we heard a splash as both their bodies sank beneath the inky sea. I floated in shock. It felt like I was watching a drama. Uncertain, looking again. After regaining my composure, I panicked a bit, but I didn't need to worry. They were the protagonists, neither would die. Falling into the sea was just like falling into a bathtub, a way to deepen their bond. Was this some melodramatic scene arranged by the system? Maybe not. People destined to be together are inherently tied. Their complicated fate was still fate. Albert, a good swimmer, quickly surfaced, agilely swimming toward the shore. Daniela, emerging from the water, gasped for air before being submerged again, her cries for help intermittent. Albert showed no signs of turning back to look at her. He swiftly swam toward the lights on the shore. Would he really let her drown? I suddenly felt anxious. In an instant, just for a moment, Albert hesitated. We all heard Daniela's desperate cries as the water filled her lungs. Albert, if you ask me whether you should save her, I would reply that as your tragic first love. I feel it's extremely unlucky, but for the past 10 years, you've known me, I am a kind person, and I don't think kindness is a fault. I know you too. You are a kind person. At most, I would blame you for not loving me as much, but I would never blame others, even if the emergence of your life's heroine is tied to me. Finally, in the depths of the night, Albert turned back, lowered his body, and dove into the sea, swimming frantically toward Daniela. I felt relieved. The surface of the water reflected the lights and colors of the beach, and in the waves stirred up by the tide, I saw their shadows drawing closer, until they completely merged into one. Chapter 11. Albert saved Daniela. As he carried her onto the beach, she clutched his shirt tightly, treating him as her lifeline. Albert pried her fingers away and dropped her, walking off without looking back. As onlookers gathered around them, back in his room, Albert sat on the floor, exhausted, gazing at the ring. Perhaps through the ring's shimmer, he vaguely saw me. Tears welled up in his eyes. He asked me, "Laura, what should I do? I want to take revenge for you." "I'm sorry. What should I do?" I squatted in front of him, reaching out with transparent fingers to touch his cheek. As my lover for 10 years, my answer was clear. He was just momentarily confused. Outside the door, I heard Daniela's colleagues frantically calling for a doctor. The room fell silent. Albert curled up in a corner, asleep, the ring resting on his lips. I comfortingly patted his shoulder, but he wouldn't feel it. In the days that followed, Daniela, fearing that Albert would pick a fight if she asked for leave, continued to work despite her feverish condition. Remarkably, Albert didn't make things difficult for her again. They waited for the last night at the resort in peace. That night, the doorbell to Albert's room suddenly rang. I floated behind him as he went to open the door, only to find Daniela standing there, gathering her courage. She managed to smile. "I haven't thanked you yet, Mr. Bai. Thank you for saving me at the beach last time." Albert raised his hand to shut the door. "Can we talk this out? I don't want you to complain about our team to the company when we get back." Albert chuckled. "That's a suggestion I'll take." Daniela appeared submissive. "I know you hate me, but my colleagues are innocent, right?" "Innocent? You don't seem qualified to use that word." Albert turned and walked back into the room, ignoring her. Daniela chased after him, her usual restraint fading. Having had a drink that night, she finally mustered the courage to yell the words she usually kept to herself. "Enough! Am I the one who harmed your girlfriend? I've apologized sincerely. I can meet any compensation you demand, but I am not the one who made the mistake. If my brother is a murderer, do I not deserve to live?" Albert's expression turned cold as he grabbed her wrist, but her feverish body made him release her uncomfortably. You deserve to live, and so does your brother, and your whole family." His tone dripped with calm sarcasm. Clearly fatigued from talking to Daniela, tears welled up in her eyes. She choked out, "What can I do, besides shamelessly begging for your forgiveness? Do I have any options? My family hurt you. Do I have any options? I don't want to be tortured by you, nor do I want to pay for them. I just want to selfishly live my own life. Do I have any options?" Albert was left speechless. He frowned and waved his hand dismissively. "Get lost." Daniela wiped her tears and turned away, but after just a few steps, she suddenly collapsed at the door of Albert's room. Well, I had already guessed what would happen. The ensuing drama would unfold with the male lead hurriedly picking up the female lead, surprised to find she had a fever, and taking care of her all night with a mixture of guilt, reluctance, and bitterness. The next morning, they would awaken in the warm morning light, their animosities thawed, and feelings gradually warming. What revenge? It was just a flirty game between the protagonists. However, 10 seconds passed, and Daniela still lay on the ground. I looked back at Albert. He stood frozen, staring at the person on the floor. What was he doing? In the next second, he turned and dialed the front desk. Come remove this person from my doorway. Remove what? Person. What person? I don't know. Where to take her? Take her to the hospital or the police station. Or the crematorium, your choice. Chapter 12. Daniela was right. After Albert left the resort, he replaced her team, and her company blamed her for the situation, docking her a month's salary and bonus. At the end of the month, when compensation payments were due as mandated by the court, the Lee family's compensation had not been deposited into my parents' account on time. My parents still mourned for me. They didn't lack for money and didn't care much about whether the compensation arrived punctually. This gave Albert another handle over them. He stormed into the Lee family home like a gangster. Daniela's parents, still troubled by their son's imprisonment, heard Albert was there to collect debts. They scowled and waved him off. If you want money, go to my daughter. Our son has already been taken to court by you. Where are we supposed to get money to pay you? Just as he intended, Albert called someone to come and empty their home. Daniela's parents cried and shouted, accusing Albert of bullying them. Daniela rushed back. Her mother grabbed her and slapped her. You foolish girl. You wait until they're emptying our house before you show up. Are you just going to watch us die? Daniela was stunned. I was also stunned. Albert turned away in annoyance. Daniela's face turned pale. She looked up at Albert's back, biting her lip, swallowing her unwilling tears. Mr. Bai, I'll borrow the money. I'll get it for you right away. Albert turned back to her, slightly displeased. Why are you crying? Am I here to rob you? This money is what you should repay. Albert's aggressive demeanor was suffocating. Daniela wiped her tears. Yes, it's what we should repay. Only then did Albert smile. Next time. Don't delay. Chapter 13. I noticed a strange phenomenon. Every morning, Albert would wake up and stare blankly at the empty pillow on his right side. Sometimes he would cry. I counted, no more than 2 tears at most. I figured it was because he kept his eyes open while daydreaming. One morning, he touched the ring on his hand and muttered to himself, Laura, I know what to do. He knew whom he should take revenge on. He should take revenge on Daniela's parents. Daniela's parents owned a small tea house where the neighbors gathered for tea and games. Albert hired people to splash red oil on it twice and reported them for illegal gambling. Before long, Daniela's parents' tea house was shut down for good. Daniela came to negotiate with Albert. The first thing Albert said to her was, Did your parents send you here? I watched Albert, his expression still inscrutable, his gaze on Daniela seeming indifferent. They appeared to be making no progress, yet he could already sense her predicament. Daniela hesitated. What will it take for you to let my parents go? They're old and can't take any more hardship. Albert raised an eyebrow, falling silent. Do you want me to kneel in public and beg you to spare them? Daniela was already defeated. Standing up before she finished speaking, Albert looked at her coldly. You can kneel. I'd love to watch you kneel wherever you like. For however long. Until your knees bleed and your legs give out. Albert chuckled lightly. But I remember your parents haven't knelt yet. Daniela glared at him, her face pale. Don't go too far. You care a lot for your family. Albert murmured. A glimmer of hope sparked in Daniela's eyes. But it's of no use. A few days later, Daniela was dragged into Albert's office by her mother. Daniela's mother immediately started throwing a tantrum. My son is already in prison. What more do you want? A big man like you is so petty. I tell you, if you want money, we don't have any. Albert closed the file he was holding. What do you have? Those broken pieces of furniture. We only have a daughter. Use her to pay the debt, perfectly compensating you with one girlfriend. Chapter 14. Daniela's mother threw a fit, leaving Albert frowning and momentarily speechless, unable to endure any longer. Daniela pushed her mother aside, shouting, Enough! How long are you going to keep this up? You little brat. You said my brother needed a car, and I bought it for him. When he got into trouble, You blamed me for it. I accepted the 2 million in compensation. And yet you still treat me like this? If you truly don't see me as your daughter, then I don't have to recognize you as my mother. Her mother stood frozen, clearly not expecting her usually obedient daughter to suddenly rebel. If you don't want to move, you can beg him on your knees. If you don't want to pay, you can file a lawsuit. Daniela wiped her tears and straightened up, pushing past her mother. Anyway, don't come looking for me again. Having witnessed the whole scene unfold, Albert remained expressionless, absent-mindedly spinning a pen in his hand. Once Daniela left, he called security to have her mother removed. I sat on Albert's desk, letting out a helpless sigh. She's quite pitiful. You know, he kept his head down, making it impossible to read his expression. Later that night, Albert's friends called him to a bar. All of them concerned about him. They tentatively suggested he might need a new relationship to help him cope. But Albert replied, "Once Laura wakes up, we'll treat everyone to dinner." Everyone present shuddered, feeling that he was losing his grip on reality. The bar's neon lights flickered through my transparent form as I helplessly watched Albert. Could it be that he planned to use me as a scapegoat for his first love forever? After a few rounds of drinks, from a distance, Albert spotted Daniela sulking alone at the bar. He had intended to ignore her, but she approached him with a drink in hand. She was clearly drunk, her eyes red, as she squeezed through the crowd to get to Albert, holding a full glass of beer. "Mr. Bai, a toast to you for showing me my parents' true colors, for helping me lose my job, and for making me feel like living is so hard for the first time." Albert's fists clenched and then relaxed, over and over, his brow furrowed, but he ultimately said nothing. From his reaction, I could tell that Daniela losing her job hadn't been part of his plan. Hot tears streamed down Daniela's face, and she suddenly placed her hand on Albert's shoulder. "I'm toasting you, so why aren't you drinking? I'm not the sinner tonight. If you don't drink now, I won't give you the time of day later." Clearly drunk and alternating between crying and laughing, Daniela appeared unexpectedly beautiful in that dim light, her reckless abandon captivating. "Albert, you really are fortunate." Was his silence a sign of being moved? I looked up at Albert, only to see him reply with a cold expression and tone. "Don't thank me. This is what your family deserves. If it's not enough, I can raise the stakes." Daniela grabbed a can of beer and hurled it at him. "Get lost! Get lost!" she cried, breaking down and disappearing into the crowd. Others around them cast strange looks at Albert. The awkward scene didn't resolve until one of Albert's partners came to help Daniela up. Curled up in a corner of the sofa, Daniela clutched a bottle of beer, crying out about Albert's torment and revenge. Albert, uninterested in explaining, stood up, grabbed his coat, and made to leave. His partner stopped him. "Aren't you going to take her home?" Albert paused, responding, "Is that something I should do?" Chapter 15. After understanding what had happened, Albert's partner was dissatisfied with his vengeful actions. "Outside the company, you can do whatever you want, but since this is work, you need to consider the company's image." "You can't." Albert leaned back in his office chair, exhausted. "So what do you want me to do?" "Here's an idea. Even though Miss Lee has been dismissed, we can still assign her the resort project. This way, it serves as compensation for her, and it can help restore our company's reputation." Albert rubbed the ring on his ring finger. Then he said, "Do as you wish." So, Albert and Daniela returned to the island I loved, but this time, their relationship seemed much more amicable. While checking into the resort, the two stood side by side, no longer at odds. I floated behind them, overhearing tourists passing by, whispering, "Look at that couple. They must be here on their honeymoon." I made the right choice coming here. No one else heard it, but I did. At that moment, Albert was telling Daniela, "The payment after the project is completed will go directly into Lara's parents' account as compensation for your family." Daniela flatly rejected. "Why should it? My money is my money. The compensation should come from my parents. If you dare not pay me my salary, I'll sue you." Albert was rendered speechless. He picked up his luggage and turned to head back to his room when Daniela suddenly called after him. "Mr. Bai." He turned to look at her, I don't think we can become friends, but for the next few days, I hope we can maintain a harmonious working atmosphere. Albert remained silent. I knew that his hatred for Daniela had already been shaken. Soon, he would come to understand her better, to know her, and to fall in love with her. And soon, he would begin to let go of me, completely. Chapter 16. In the following days, Daniela showcased her personal charm in front of Albert. At work, she was meticulous and assertive. The two could argue for hours over whether the resort room doors should be automatic or sliding. Once they were tired of arguing, Albert would call for a ceasefire, and Daniela would bring him a cup of coffee, saying, "Drink this. Once you're done, we'll continue." In the evenings, as the sunset's glow shimmered on the sea, Daniela played in the water with some children from the tourists. Albert stood on the beach, watching her, not moving for quite some time. Daniela smiled sweetly, and if he felt attracted, I wouldn't be surprised. Finally, the main story was about to begin. I was behind Albert, not looking at his expression. I thought my chest should feel heavy right now, but I had lost my body and was left with a disoriented spirit. Feeling no pain, Daniela approached him, teasing, "If you want to play, come into the water. What are you standing there for? After accumulating so much debt, how can you still smile?" he asked. "Should I walk around with a long face?" Daniela raised an eyebrow, her demeanor lively. "The more you all try to push me to my end, the more I'll live happily." Albert turned to leave. "No one wants you dead, Daniela." Like a dancing light, a spring breeze in motion, according to the script. As they moved, the heroine would enter the hero's world. In the deep of night, during a late-night work session, both Daniela and Albert fell asleep on a pile of design sketches. When Albert woke up, he opened his eyes to see Daniela's sleeping face. He watched her for a long time, not wanting to get up. It felt like an eternity of 2 minutes, long enough for me to vaguely hear my own heavy, aching heartbeat. I finally felt a hint of sadness. "Albert, when you see your heroine sleeping peacefully before you, what do you feel? Joy, guilt, confusion, or is it something deeper?" In those long 2 minutes, was there even a second when my face crossed your mind? I was your partner for 10 years. Of course, if you choose to forget me now, I won't protest. After all, those 10 years were a third of my life, yet merely an eighth of yours. Chapter 17. Daniela discovered a beautiful patch of grass on the island at the resort. She was about to discuss how to make good use of it with Albert when he flatly rejected her. "No." Daniela paused, confused. "Why not?" "A simple no means no. Are you unhappy with me again?" Daniela said angrily, turning to leave. Honestly, I wanted to say no too. I had mentioned to Albert more than once that I dreamed of having a wedding on that grass, even foolishly searching for design ideas, imagining how I would arrange everything like all naive little girls do. Every time, Albert had said, "Sure, I understand." Now, Daniela wanted to transform that space into something I couldn't even imagine. Would Albert hold his ground for me? Or would he give in to his leading lady? 2 days later, Albert's partner came to the resort to check on the project's progress. Daniela presented her plans for the grass area, but since Albert had disagreed, she decided to scrap the proposal. To her surprise, Albert's partner shook his head. "If it's beneficial for the project, we have to implement it. Don't worry about him. Leave it to me." The next day, Daniela found Albert and tentatively asked him again why he had vetoed her plan. For once, Albert responded calmly. "Lara really liked it. Few tourists go to that patch of grass, and I want to do everything I can to preserve it as a memorial to Lara." Daniela was taken aback. Then, she nervously clasped her hands together, tears welling in her eyes as she said to Albert, "I'm so sorry." Albert looked at her, puzzled. "What for?" When they arrived, the area was already fenced off, construction signs erected. I could hear the sounds of grass being cut and heavy footsteps. The sacred place I had once dreamed of was about to be trampled into a tourist spot. Honestly, it didn't matter. Could I really claim it for myself? It just struck me that the traces of my existence in this world were slowly fading away. I wanted to cry, but I was just a fleeting, ethereal soul. I wouldn't cry, not even moistening my eyes. I could only let this world erase me. Let my lover forget me. There was nothing I could do. Chapter 18. Albert tore down the construction sign, rushing in and shouting for them to stop. The workers refused. If we stop now, we won't meet our deadline. The furious foreman assumed Albert was causing trouble and threw a shovel at him. Daniela dashed forward, hugging Albert tightly. The shovel struck her shoulder. It hurt enough to make her wince and gasp. Albert froze, looking down at her. Daniela, fighting through the pain, spoke in a pained tone. I'm sorry, I really didn't know this place meant so much to you. The workers continued, ignoring the chaos. Fuming, Albert charged at the foreman, and they began to fight. Daniela tried to stop him, but she lacked the strength due to the pain. I watched the uproar in silence. How melodramatic of me. At that moment, I wondered if Albert was angry for me or for Daniela. It wasn't until Albert's partner arrived that the chaotic scene was brought under control. Albert, have you lost your mind? Are you willing to sabotage our work for someone who's already dead? With bloodshot eyes, Albert grabbed his partner's collar. Lara truly considered you a friend. Is this how you repay her? You promised her you wouldn't touch this land. When did I ever promise her that? Albert, stop pretending to be sentimental. You didn't shed a tear when your girlfriend died, and you wouldn't even put up her photo for fear it would delay your next conquest. What are you pretending to be? A good boyfriend? She's not dead. She'll wake up tomorrow morning. Albert's deranged outburst made everyone around him take a few steps back in disgust. His partner shoved him aside. You're really sick. Albert fell to the ground, dazed. Everyone regarded him as a madman, except for Daniela, who steadfastly supported him, tears in her eyes. She discreetly held his hand. Chapter 19. Daniela went to the pharmacy to buy ointment for her bruises, returning to the resort just in time to see Albert smoking at the entrance. He glanced at her and asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, thank you." Daniela paused, a smile breaking through as she looked down. "Maybe it's really me who owes you." Neither of them said anything more, standing quietly side by side, gazing at the calm sea that stretched like a black cloth in the distance. The scene was beautiful, like the ending of a story where the hero and heroine finally united after countless trials. But Albert shattered the atmosphere by asking, "Why haven't you left yet? Have you eaten dinner?" Albert turned to look at Daniela. That sudden question seemed to unleash a surge of hidden currents between them, and we all understood that it signified a change in their relationship. "It's none of your business." Albert coldly turned back toward his room. "Albert, you really need to let yourself go. She has been gone for a long time. Do you truly believe she will wake up again?" Daniela raised her hand, courageously grabbing Albert's sleeve. "I just think it's too sad to see you like this. You need to get better. There's a brighter future waiting for you. Understand?" Albert shook her hand off. "Miss Lee, you don't have the right to say that." But Daniela stood firm. "But she would want you to be happy." "No, I was actually a petty person. I'd be angry if the one I loved for so many years simply forgot me." Daniela repeated. "She truly wants you to be happy." Suddenly, Albert laughed. A sneering, sarcastic, and rude smile as if mocking Daniela for her ignorance and arrogance. He responded with the same determined tone. "You're really overstepping your bounds." Chapter 20. Albert became obsessed, desperately trying to prove that I would wake up. He went to bed early each night, waking at dawn. Sadly, he still found the space beside him empty. As the resort project entered its final stages, Daniela often sought Albert to discuss designs. I could see her intentions whenever she quietly raised her gaze to Albert's profile. The feelings in her eyes were hard to hide. She was making every effort to help Albert return to a happy reality. But Albert was unresponsive. One night, Daniela came to invite him for a walk on the beach. Albert looked down, shrugging off his jacket in a few swift motions. "I'm going to sleep. Aren't you leaving?" "My girlfriend prefers to sleep early." Daniela's expression turned cold, but she still forced a humble smile. "Then get some rest. How about we have breakfast together tomorrow? You haven't tried the soy milk in the restaurant, right? Then could you grab me 2 servings? My girlfriend loves it too." "Enough, Albert," Daniela said, unable to tolerate it any longer. Just act normal for once. Don't call me that, Albert replied coldly, pushing her out and slamming the door. The room fell silent, and I watched Albert helplessly. The next day, Daniela was fully rejuvenated, radiating warmth like a small sun as she came to find Albert with her design sketches. Albert glanced at them, his expression icy. Miss Lee, I really don't understand what you're trying to design. Daniela awkwardly crumpled her papers. Albert suddenly smiled. But maybe my girlfriend would be interested. She used to love dragging me along to design this and that. Enough. No need to bring her up again. We're all having a hard time, Daniela shouted, rushing out of the room. Chapter 21. For 2 consecutive days, Daniela didn't show up. Then came a stormy day. The resort island was shrouded in darkness, and guests were advised to stay in their rooms. Albert went outside and ran into his partner, who was drenched. When he asked, he learned that his partner had gone to the southern woods for an inspection, and Daniela was with him. But Daniela hadn't returned. He had come back first. Albert frowned and spat at his partner. You really are a jerk. He turned around, grabbed an umbrella, and dashed out of the resort, heading north through the dreadful weather. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching him anxiously scan the surroundings. Soon, once he found Daniela, this place would no longer belong to me. He found Daniela just before nightfall. Both of them looked a mess. The moment Daniela saw Albert, she threw herself into his arms, crying harder than she ever had before. Albert pushed her away. Let's go back. Although his words were still cold, his actions genuinely warmed Daniela. She was completely ensnared. On the way back, she opened her heart and spoke of her tragic past. When I first started working, my parents took my little brother on a trip. I took a day off to see them to the airport. It was a rainy day, and the car crashed into the roadside. I got trapped by the seatbelt, and they didn't come for me. After that, I never dared to drive again. It seemed the car was just for my brother. Albert, thank you for not abandoning me today. Albert stared ahead at the road, pretending to be confused. What? Thank you for not throwing me away like they did. Albert fell silent, and the atmosphere in the car turned strangely heavy. By the time they returned to the resort, it was late at night, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. Albert refused to share an umbrella with Daniela, walking ahead in the rain, until suddenly he looked down and stopped in his tracks. Daniela stepped forward, finally standing under the same umbrella with him, and looked up to ask, "What's wrong?" Albert's face was a mixture of helplessness and stiffness. His eyes like a child's, filled with innocence, then confusion, finally panic and pain twisted his features. Where's my ring? Albert knelt on the wet grass, searching for that small silver ring, while the rain pelted down on his shoulders. Where's the ring? Where's the ring? Where's the ring? Yes, Albert, in your search for Daniela, you lost my ring. It wasn't even an official engagement ring. After all, you hadn't proposed yet, but it was the only one you could find, the one that had held my warmth. Now, you've lost it. Chapter 22. Daniela said that losing something means it should be let go. Fine. I didn't know how to argue against that. The next morning, Daniela brought breakfast to Albert. Since he didn't come out, she placed it at his door. I sat on the windowsill, watching her hesitate but ultimately not knock. I never expected the female lead would take the initiative first. By sunset, Albert finally opened his door. Daniela had been waiting there, her eyes lighting up with joy when she saw him. You finally. Are you insane? Albert frowned, looking at her with disbelief. You want to be my new girlfriend? Daniela didn't speak, her face reflecting a complex expression. Do you want me to become a family with the murderer who killed Laura, and during holidays go together to burn incense for her? Or do you want me to pick up the killer from prison as her brother-in-law and say it's okay? I won't hold it against you. What's wrong? Are you in desperate need of someone to help you pay off debts every month? His words turned Daniela pale. Anger flared in her eyes, and the affection she felt vanished without a trace. Miss Lee, if we become a couple, it would be our greatest misfortune, so stay away from me. Albert's words were final. He stepped over the breakfast tray at the door and brushed past Daniela. I turned to see her leaving with her head down, her figure vanishing around the corner, never to return. Clearly, she hadn't expected the story to unfold this way, and neither had I. Albert walked out of the resort alone and headed to my favorite patch of grass. Looking like a zombie, the golden sunset shone perfectly on that grassy area. It was now in shambles, with overturned patches of dirt and crooked tourist signs. Albert stared blankly there for a long time. I stayed with him in silence for a while. He could no longer caress the ring on his finger, but I could feel that at this moment, he was thinking of me, through the vibrant colors of the sunset. I hazily envisioned the wedding I had long dreamed of. I saw myself in a beautiful wedding dress, and Albert at the end of the aisle, still smiling at me. In the image, we were both young and full of life, and in the moment the sun dipped below the horizon. It symbolized that Albert and I had just completed a grand wedding. Chapter 23. That night, Albert returned to the resort and made a decision. I understood his decision when he shouted to his partner, "You promised her you wouldn't touch this land." I felt a twinge of confusion. That was the 30th cycle. I had asked his partner to promise me while lying on a hospital bed because of cancer. And when Albert exclaimed, "She'll wake up tomorrow morning," it suddenly dawned on me. Had he been with me through 99 cycles? I had died 99 times, and he had watched me die 99 times? Had he held 99 funerals for me, as numb as I was, without a tear left to shed? Did he know I would wake up on the 4th day in the morning? So he didn't bother to set up a memorial photo, just went to bed early each night, waiting to see me the next day? But maybe he didn't understand why I was trapped in this cycle or why I hadn't woken up this time. I had kept him waiting for a long time. Finally, he realized that I would never wake up again. At this moment, Albert made a decision. As he picked up a fruit knife, there was a knock at the door. It was Daniela's voice again, inviting him to dinner. A light, hesitant sound, filled with the courage to finally knock after much deliberation. Her feelings for Albert had evidently deepened. If Albert chose to walk through that door, he would fall in love with his leading lady, be healed and restored, and find happiness and beauty. He would live a life of happiness without me. As per the so-called script, he could also choose to ignore the calls from outside for the sake of me, his discarded first love. He sank into the filled bathtub, taking a gamble, just like when he insisted I stand with him on the podium when he won the long-distance race years ago. The gentle crimson slowly seeped into my vision. His features became soft and blurred. I didn't cry. In a daze, I thought I heard Albert's voice. It was deep and solemn, as if he was telling me a story. He said, "I don't know when, but I had a dream. It was a long dream. In the dream, the person I loved the most would leave me one day, and then on the 4th morning after leaving, I would wake up. Whenever I wanted to ask, it would feel stuck in my throat." Well, I accepted this absurd dream, and living like this wasn't bad. Until one day, the person who was supposed to wake up never did. I wanted to be a bad person to take revenge on her, but it's difficult. Whenever I see the sister of that murderer, I think of her. She always smiles so happily. I have no first love, no leading lady, and I don't want to fulfill someone else's script for me. I only have one beloved, named Laura. We've known each other for 13 years and loved each other for 10. She has long hair and occasionally thinks of cutting it short. She has single eyelids, but her makeup bag always has double eyelid tape. She likes wearing hats because it means she doesn't have to wash her hair. And I love to kiss the corners of her lips, her fingertips, and her forehead. She will not become a blurry image in my memory. She won't be a stepping stone on my way to love someone else. My love, you will always be my vivid and distinct lover. I remember not only your face, your lips, but also your splendid life. I've waited a long time, and since you haven't woken up, I must go to sleep.